Well, hello everyone. I'm Tyler Hogan with Bright Ideas Press, and I'm here today with Susan Barton. And today we're going to be talking about this little book right here, A Young Scholar's Guide to Composers. Now, Susan, I know you love music, don't you?
I do.
Tell us a little bit about your love for music, how you came to it, and what that's meant in your life and in your homeschool.
I think some of my earliest experiences with music that just bring a smile to my face still is remembering bouncing up and down on, my dad was a pastor, and I just bounce up and down on his knee during revival times when we would have special musicians come in and play those old time hymns that I just loved it. And it helped me to see worship in a different way and connect with it in a different way.
Hmm.
And so those were probably some of my earliest memories of music just being very special to me. But as I grew older, I became very passionate about teaching music. And a part of that was really after I had established a kinder music studio, we started a class for infants. And we would have babies that were 0 to 3 months in this class that were experiencing first time milestones in the hour that we were together. And moms just knew to have their cameras ready, and they were calling husbands and just so appreciating having that experience with one another. But it was very clear what we know intellectually and what scientists have shown us, that music has such a profound impact on learning, whether you're playing an instrument or listening to music, moving to music, that all of those different experiences with music just have a profound impact on how we learn. So to watch those little bitty babies having that experience in front of me just solidified all of the research behind it. And I became very passionate about teaching music at that point.
Yeah, the science behind what listening to music does for our brains is just fascinating.
It is. It really is. So, with that in mind, what caused Bright Ideas Press to want to develop a piece of curriculum like the Young Scholar's Guide to Composers?
Well, so this book was written by my mom, Maggie Hogan, and Melissa Craig. They co-authored it together. And I have to tell you, my mom, by her own admission, she can't carry a tune in a bucket. She is just not musically inclined at all. Melissa, on the other hand, is very musically gifted and skilled. And the two of them working together on this just made me so happy to watch, because they're coming at it from the same place. They both want people to be able to understand and appreciate music, regardless of whether or not you make music yourself. You don't have to be musically inclined or gifted to use this curriculum. And that was by design. They wanted everybody to be able to understand who these composers were, what they were writing and why, the faith or worldview behind what they wrote, and just be able to gain that appreciation of classical music. And I think that really shines through in this book. Is it's for people who are very musical and want to pass on their own musical legacy and heritage, but it's also written for people like my mom, who wanted her kids to be able to understand, enjoy, and appreciate classical music, even if she wasn't going to be able to teach us piano herself or anything like that.
Well, I think that that's a really important point about this book, that um, I think you're affirming for us anyway, without putting words in your mouth, that I could be tone deaf, I could never have picked up an instrument, and this
Mhm.
is still really going to be accessible for me to teach and for my children to enjoy.
Absolutely. Very, very much so. Now, so this particular piece of curriculum, it's in the same series as our Young Scholar's Guide to Poetry book. So there's a lot of similarities. Susan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what sets this curriculum apart from other music programs?
You brushed on it a little bit just a moment ago, that our approach to humanities, both with poetry and composers, is to help bridge that human connection. So whether you're studying our poetry book or you're studying our composer's book, our goal is for you to really understand the person that wrote the music or wrote the poetry, and in this case, the music, that we know what that person's background was, and the time period that they lived, some of the things that may have been impacting how they saw the world at the time.
Hmm.
So by having that human connection with that music, I think that we deepen our interest and our understanding of the world around us. Like that just becomes so holistic in our learning, because then it touches on what you might be studying in geography, it touches on what you might be studying in history, and we try to have that holistic approach in each one of our subjects, but particularly here with this human element in the humanities, that um, obviously it sets it apart that anyone can pick up this book, as we were talking about a minute ago. You don't have to have a music background. That is a very special component of this book. But I think the thing that I value about it most is that human connection.
Yeah, that is really special. And being able to connect with what is really an important part of the whole Western heritage of music, and being able to feel like you know these people who helped develop and pioneer these different movements and ideas in music is a really special thing.
Well, and touching on that, Tyler, can you share with us really the topics, the content that is covered in Composers?
Sure. So I'm looking at the table of contents right now. It's broken into a couple of different periods of study. So there's a lesson on ancient music through music in the Middle Ages, a lesson on music in the Renaissance, and then after that, when you really pick up in the Baroque period, you get periods with a bunch of different lessons on particular composers within that period. So like you've got the Baroque period with Vivaldi and Handel and Bach. You have the classical period, so you'll cover, Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven. There's quite a number of composers in the Romantic period. And then one thing that I really like about this is that it goes up through modern days. So you have a contemporary period that covers like Scott Joplin and Charles Ives, all the way up to John Williams, who's still conducting and he's still doing amazing things. So I love the fact that it brings that connection all the way back, from Vivaldi to modern composers, and helps you see the threads and the influence between them.
What do we not cover in Composers?
Well, so it was tough, I know, for Mom and Melissa when they were picking and choosing, because they only had so many lessons that they could fit in. So they had to choose which composers they wanted to focus on. So it does focus specifically on, Western civilization, classical composers, and there's so many composers that they had to leave some people out, some just for the sake of space, but also because when you're doing biographies of great artists, sometimes they get a little bit dicey. So there's some people that they just didn't feel like would be a good fit for the book. Like um, Wagner isn't in the book. Hitler's favorite composer just didn't quite make the cut. So the book does cover the faith lives of the composers as much as they can be known, and tries to show, how their worldview impacted their music as well.
So, given that we're talking a bit about sensitivity, what ages would you say Composers is really geared toward?
So I would use composers for like third through eighth grade. It's really that middle ages kind of range. You can certainly use it for older students in high school. I wouldn't try and use it as like a music credit or anything like that, but it's a great supplement to your other music studies or art appreciation or history even. So definitely useful for older students, but it's really geared for that third through eighth grade range right there.
I think one of the things that is very adaptable with this book is if you've had it early in your homeschooling and you have a student who maybe really poured through the whole book in those middle grades, maybe they come back in another class and say, oh, yes, I remember us talking about this composer. And then they can come back to the same book and look for research ideas that can just springboard their learning in another subject they may be doing later in high school. So this is a book that we just like to have out on a bookshelf in the
Yeah.
living room.
I mean, it's even great as a coffee table book, because you hear classical music, in movies or on YouTube or just out and about. It's fairly pervasive, and to finally be able to recognize, oh, I know that piece. I remember, who wrote it and what the circumstances were. And it brings a whole deeper level of meaning to the things that you hear every day.
That's true. That whole humanities theme that we've tried to
Exactly.
introduce. Okay, so Tyler, another thing that is common at Bright Ideas Press is that we have a student reader and we have a companion guide formula. And so
Mhm.
for those of our listeners who may not be familiar with those two components, can you share what is in each of them?
Sure. So the reader, like with most of our curriculum, that's your lesson text. That's going to be a biography of a composer or an overview of a musical era. The lessons aren't terribly long. Like you could do them as a family read aloud in like 15 minutes. They're nothing outrageous, even for younger ones who can read by themselves pretty well. So reading through those lessons, that's going to be um, probably the second most important piece of the curriculum, is just absorbing the text. The most important piece is actually listening to the music, and the music can be found in lots of different places, and we give in the companion guide links to where you can find all kinds of pieces from the composers that we're studying. And we also give discussion questions and listening suggestions. So as you're going through, here are things to listen for, things to talk about. So all of that would be in the companion guide. The companion guide doesn't actually include like recordings in and of itself, but it'll send you to places where you can listen to them. Um, there's lots of spots online. I'm going to share my screen real quick and just show you some of the companion guide pages. So one of the things that we have is every lesson has a student review. You can see at the bottom left, and they're usually 10 questions, and they're just there to help your students feel like they have a solid grip and for you to gauge how much they comprehended from the lesson. So they're a mix of fill in the blank or short answer and multiple choice, sometimes some matching. And then there is also an answer key. So you can see the bottom middle has an answer key with the answers in blue there. And it's a mixture of events from the composer's life, terminology, a light amount of music theory, and being able to understand some of the historical pieces that were going on at the same time. And then there's some other really helpful components, like there's the composer info card, which is kind of a graphic organizer where your students can complete sort of a small biography of the person that they've just been studying. There's a set of coloring pages for each lesson, and then there's a really beautiful and fascinating timeline that goes in like 50-year increments and shows all of the influence and overlap between the different composers, who lived when and who was friends with whom and who influenced who. And that activity I think is a really fun one.
I
So
love the one.
there's also some maps in there. There's a bunch of different games. My favorite part is the listening suggestions, because that's just so crucial. That listening to the music is really the most important part of the curriculum.
Well, and I really like the collection that you have represented here, because when you take the coloring pages and you take the composer info card and you allow a child to build their own, it's almost as if they have their own little composer's book when they finish, just
Mm-hmm.
like we do in we have a geography book called North Star Geography. And not that I'm telling you anything because you wrote it, but for our viewers, we allow children to create their own atlas, and children just take such ownership of having created something of their studies. And this is another example of that you can have this beautiful artwork and your timeline and your composer info cards put together in such a way that they have their own little composer's book when they finish, if you'd like to.
Yeah, and there's directions in the book on how to make a composer's folder book. So which is a really fun activity, especially if you've got, very hands-on kinesthetic kind of learner.
Yeah. And then on the flip side of it, I'm going to show just how old-fashioned I am for a moment. But as we keep going through this, and I think about, families that would just like to do this at a really easy pace and to just enjoy the music, it takes me all the way back. I'm a big Laura Ingalls Wilder fan, and it just takes me back to this concept of Pa pulling out the fiddle after supper and everyone just gathering around doing their own thing, but still being at pause feet to hear this music.
Hmm.
And, this study can be that way, that with these discussion questions and with the short lesson, this is something that you can just push back from the table and read the lesson and discuss a couple of easy discussion points together, and then pull that music up and just enjoy sitting there as a family together. That it could be as simple as that to complete
Hmm.
the study.
Yeah, it's really not a difficult or intense curriculum piece to integrate into your family's schedule.
What would a week look like, Tyler?
So I've got a little sample schedule here, and this is just a suggestion. You can use this program however you want. But if you were to do a 3-day a week schedule, you'd start off by reading the lesson together, and then listening to the recordings, and then doing the note-taking page, or the student review. They're essentially the same thing. One is there to help the student with their note-taking skills, and the other is more of an assessment for you. And then on Wednesday, listening to the music again, because again, listening is the most important part of this curriculum. And then you can do some of the other activities like filling out the composer card, adding to your timeline, or doing the little mapping activities that go along with the different composers. And then Friday, if you wanted to do 3 days a week instead of just 2, you can listen to the music again and discuss it a little bit further. And with a lot of the composers, there's quite a few options for which pieces to listen to, so you might spread those out. But there's benefit even in just listening to the same pieces multiple times, because you'll understand it better each time and be able to dig a little bit deeper and understand how to answer those questions a little bit better after each listen through.
Isn't that the beautiful thing about every type of art, that you discover another layer and another layer, and it
Hmm.
just reaches a different piece of you? Okay, so we've talked about what your week would look like. Um, do we need to include all of those things? Because I see a lot of options in that companion guide, and like,
Oh, yeah, like with pretty much everything we write, there's more in here than any one family needs to try and accomplish in a year. So don't try and do everything. I mean, it's a gentle enough study that you probably could do everything in this book if you wanted to, but that's not essential. We like to provide lots of opportunities so that you can engage kids with different interests and learning styles. But yeah, you don't have to do all of that. If you did nothing but read the text and listen to those listening suggestions and talk about them, that would be plenty. Everything else is gravy. And some people like a lot of gravy, but it's not the meat and the potatoes.
and you've talked a little bit about where to find the music. So, is all of the music in the book? And do I need any other resources in order to conduct this class with my kids?
So you don't need any other resources, but there is a suggested reading list. So if you want to dig deeper into any particular composer, we give you lots of great places to go and search for more information. All of the music is linked to from the book, but the nature of the internet is that sometimes links die. So we've done our best to curate a really good selection and make sure that if you're listening to an aria, we've tried to make sure like the costuming is appropriate, that sort of thing. But if a link goes dead, we'll either put up a replacement on our errata page, or you can just do your own search and find another version of the music to listen to or to watch. So all of it is linked from the book, but it's not necessarily in the book itself.
And I've found, having conducted this at a couple of different time periods with my own kids, that it's really easy to run that search and have these pieces pop up. So, just again,
They're not
maybe
hard to find.
no, only a caution that if you're using a video, that you do scan the video, because you just never know.
I think we have a playlist on the Bright Ideas Press YouTube channel that has just all of the composer pieces that we link to.
And that's another place for folks to visit too. If you aren't familiar with our YouTube channel, this may be the first time that you're connecting through it. That we have a variety of resources to help you use our curriculum there. So Tyler, do I need to have my children enrolled in music? Are we to that point that when when I get to this study, do I need to sign them up for violin or piano
I
or?
mean, if you want to, that's great. If you, if you can, those are always beneficial. I've never heard someone who uh, resented having music lessons. Most people, even if they didn't like them at the time, they appreciated them later on in life. I mean, I know people who, they did like a year of piano or two and they didn't really go anywhere with it, but it's still a beneficial thing just for their appreciation. But for the purposes of this curriculum, no, that's not necessary at all. You don't have to be doing music lessons or be in an orchestra yourself or anything like that.
We want to study Vivaldi. You don't have to be Vivaldi.
Exactly. Yeah. It's designed so that you can appreciate what other people are doing. If you want to join them, that's great, but you don't have to.
I think that that's one of the reasons that this can be such a great tool in a classroom environment, because like you're saying, that we're experiencing what someone else has written and created, but what I get from that versus what you might get from that, Tyler, or your mom or Melissa or a student in the room, even just with myself and my two sons, we each saw something, heard something, or even the life of the composer struck us differently, or maybe someone remembers something else that was happening in history at the time. So for us to all come around and share what a particular piece seems to mean to us as we listen to it, or things that we pick up on from that time in history, we all bring a different perspective to the table when we study most anything, but particularly humanities.
Mhm.
So this course, we leave it so open-ended, as you saw with the pages in the companion guide. There are many activities that you can either do individually or collectively. They're all prepared for the teacher.
Mhm.
The listening examples are already linked there. You've got your lesson ready to read. So this is
Yeah,
really a plug and play for a classroom.
very much. So if you've got a classroom or a co-op that you want to use this for, even if you're just meeting once a week, this is a great option. Um, and it's easy for the kids to do the listening on their own at home during the rest of the week, and it's not going to be too much homework for them. So I think that's a really good fit for co-ops and classrooms.
Yeah, even to send them home with those discussion questions that you may have talked about it in the classroom among your students, but to send them home and say, hey, what does your family think of this? And
Mhm.
what, it's just a great thing to gather back around the supper table and have
Absolutely.
value. Okay, so if we have everyone all excited about this, let's tell them where to get it. So if you would like a copy of the Young Scholars Guide for Composers, and you're a family, you want to use this with your within your home, then you can find it with your favorite homeschool retailer. So anywhere that you buy homeschool curriculum, you should be able to find both components of our Young Scholars Guide series. If by chance you can't, and this is your favorite supplier, drop them a note and say, I'm really interested in this series from Bright Ideas Press, and we'd be glad to help them out. If you are a reseller or an administrator or a teacher or some sort of organizer and you need to buy in volume, we would love to get volume orders out to you. So we handle those directly. Just give us an email or a call at the office. That email address would be contact@brightideaspress.com. If you're family and you have trouble finding it in the retail market, which you really shouldn't at all, it's pretty easy search. But if you have any trouble finding it, or if you just have questions as you dive into it, we're here to help you out. So send us an email at contact@brightideaspress.com for those reasons too. Tyler, it's been great to talk to you about this particular study today.
This is fun. I hope more and more people are able to dive in. It can be an intimidating topic, and if you don't feel like you already have a strong musical background yourself, I think that's a big barrier for a lot of people. So I'm just glad that we were able to offer something to help usher new families into this world of classical music and be able to enjoy it and appreciate it and break down those barriers of intimidation and whatnot. So yeah, I hope lots of people enjoy going through this. And like you said, Susan, if you have any questions or need to reach out to someone as you're going through it, don't hesitate to give us a call or shoot us an email.
Yep, both of us are right here. That's the beauty of a small business.
Exactly. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Tyler.